So, hey, before we dive into today's episode, I want to send you a little invitation to join me for a free class with me. I am running a workshop called Ease, Somatic Exercise for a Weary Body, on Tuesday, the 3rd of October, 2023 at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. There will be a recording if you can't join me live, but I would love to see you there if you are interested in learning how somatic exercise and self-kindness can help you to experience less tension, more ease, and feel more at home in your body. You can find the details to join me in the show notes or head to ericawebb.com.au/free-workshop. So hey there friends, it's Erica here with, I don't know what number episode of SelfKind. I am recording this episode kind of on the fly. I have not written my normal notes. I have not checked which podcast episode number this is going to be, but wanting to give a little bit more of my story, a little bit more of my why, a little bit more of why I am so passionate about the work that I do, because I think it's important. I think it's important context. I think it's helpful for you to potentially see yourself in my story, even though the way that I work with other humans isn't a direct reflection of just the things that have worked for me. I still think it provides really useful context and hopefully a little bit of an opportunity for you to be like, oh, me, like, I see that for me too. So yeah, that's what we're going to dive into. So as I said, I have no idea what podcast number this is, but it'll be something and it doesn't really matter. But I wanted to share a little bit more of what has led me to where I am. I was listening to something the other day, and on that podcast, the conversation that I was listening to was really talking about the benefits of sort of sharing our stories with other people. And it occurred to me that I have been hesitant perhaps to share some of my own story. And I don't say hesitant because I have absolutely shared it here before. I have shared elements of my story. I'm not private about it at all. But I hesitate because the work that I do in the world really isn't about me. It really isn't about me. And it never has been. And yet it's impossible for the work that I do in the world not to be influenced by where I've been, right? And what has happened to me and what has been my own kind of journey, for want of a better, less cliched word. And I kind of sometimes want to preface the kind of history and the story of what's led me here with a recognition that I really don't believe that just because something worked for me, it's going to work for you. And that's why in my toolkit of tools that I use with clients, I'm not just relying on the things that have worked for me. I expand my repertoire. I look to other places. I'm constantly kind of filling my toolkit with resources that might be really helpful for other people. And I think that's important because we get sold a lot of stuff that is just like, well, if I can do it, you can do it. This is how I did it, so this is what will work for you. And at the heart of what I teach, at the heart of what I share, at the heart of the work that I do is really a sense of helping people to foster self-trust, and for me too, that's been a big part of it, is this ability to foster self-trust and inner listening and trusting the body and befriending ourselves. And so that in itself requires that this be a very individual, personal process. It's not as simple as saying, well, I did this, you do this, problem solved. Now, is there space for that? Of course there is. I believe that there's always space for a little bit of like, hey, here's what helped me, perhaps give it a try. And that absolutely comes through in my work. But it's not just this is the only tool I've got, so hopefully it works. But all of that said, I do really think that there's great value in understanding, like, why this? Why self-kindness? Why movement? Why mindfulness? What is the reason for all of that? I have shared my story here on the podcast before, but I want to go over pieces of it today. So let's just dive in. Rewind quite a while. I don't even know how long. How old am I now? I'm 40 now. Rewind to when I entered the workforce and I was probably like 21, I guess. And I was just reflecting before on how like young and naive I was and how excited I was to enter into this, professional world and to feel really kind of important, getting on the train every morning and heading into work and doing this important work in the world and all of that sort of stuff. And it very quickly became apparent that I've suffered physically in that process, right? I ended up with really chronic, persistent neck pain. I think I shared recently on the podcast that at one point in that part of my life, I went to like all the people. I saw osteopaths, I saw chiropractors, I saw a acupuncturist who actually sent me away. He fired me. He was like, you need to come back when you're not so tense because I can't do anything with this. And so I kind of was this big ball of physical tension. And at that point, I don't think I understood the impact that my emotional life was having on how I felt. And the environments that I found myself in the workplace were actually really not great. I had to deal with, stuff that I just don't think 20-year-olds should deal with. In a couple of the workplaces, there was a lot of bullying. There was a lot of just sort of toxic cultural stuff going on in the workplace. And I was not prepared for it. And I definitely didn't manage it in the way that I would manage it now. And there was essentially a part of me that felt like there was just something wrong with my body. Like something was broken, something needed to be replaced. And it wasn't unusual for me to be like, I just wish I could have a transplant, like shoulders up, just take that off, replace it with a new set because something's completely wrong with all of this. And it's interesting because now in hindsight, I look at that and I think, oh, it's interesting that I didn't put the pieces together there, that there was an element of like how I was thinking, how I was relating to myself, my emotional stuff, because, that's kind of where I was feeling all of that. But in any case, this really chronic tension, this really chronic discomfort that I just could not find relief from, even with, at that point, a very regular, consistent yoga practice. I had this moment in a yoga class where I was like, oh, I just wish I could do yoga all day because it's kind of this opportunity to turn my brain off. That's how it felt. It was like when I'm doing yoga, everything else kind of disappears. And it's interesting because now I don't think that's the goal, not for me anyway, to shut off my mind. For me, yoga almost started as this way of isolating myself from real life. And while there is great value, obviously, in finding something that makes you feel good and helps you feel pleasure and joy and comfort and all of those things, there was also a part of me that used my yoga practice as a way of turning away from everything else, a way of turning away from my deeper humanity, a way of turning away from those parts of me that felt broken. And now, 20 odd years on, I really see that physical practice as a way of getting closer to my humanity, as a way of getting closer to what can sometimes feel very messy, and having a huge amount of compassion for that, having a huge amount of willingness to sort of see myself in that with kindness, with love. And that's a long way from where I began. But I think that was a really valuable doorway to come in through, because would I have ended up where I was? If not, probably not. Anyway, fast forward a number of years, and this is probably the bit that has been the most significant in my subsequent work. I genuinely hated who I was. I was swimming in self-loathing. This happened, I think, quietly over a period of years. I think that there's always been an element, or there had always been this element of sort of self-loathing. And it's not unusual, right, in your teenage years to kind of experience that through comparison and all of those things. And I definitely had an ability to, I don't know, like almost just assume that was okay and normal. A part of being human was this kind of like self-loathing, because I think we see that modeled so often, right? We see women complaining about their bodies. We see people very much normalizing this way of being in relation to themselves that is kind of like, well, this is how it is, but it's not very perfect. It's not very good. Like, I am broken. I'm unfixable. And at this point in my life, I had 2 young kids, and I'd been teaching yoga for quite a while at that point. And I had moments where I didn't mind myself, but on the most part, I was like riddled with just this self-loathing. And my body hurt. The yoga helped, absolutely. I felt like I could manage that chronic tension quite well through movement. But my being, my soma, was a very unpleasant place to be because it was mean, it was unkind, it was judgmental, it was critical, and it didn't feel like a peaceful place to come home to. And that's hard when it's like home, right? How do you exist in a space where your physical home of your body and that inner kind of landscape of your mind feels unkind, feels like, not home, right? And that is the thing for me that, when I try to distill what it is I do and why it is that I do it, it's the statement or the idea that I always come back to is like, I want so much for us as humans to feel at home in ourselves, to feel at home in our physical bodies, to feel at home in our mental space, to feel like we are our own soft place to land. Because when it's not like that, and I've been in both places, it's so hard. It's so hard. It is this feeling, I remember having this feeling of like, how do I escape this? Like, how do I just kind of claw my way out of this discomfort of the physical tension and the layer upon layer of like, and I also don't like myself. And I also don't like, how I talk to myself, but I don't know any different because I don't like myself. So how do I break through that? All of that stuff. And I think it was a blessing in some ways that I already had a movement practice. I already had a movement background. My university studies were in behavioral science. So I kind of had these ideas. I had the framework, I guess, for a lot of the work that it was that I would go on to do. But the difference between knowing something and being that thing, practicing those tools, doing those things is massively different. And it wasn't until I worked with someone else that I really started to do the things that would allow me to move from that self-loathing, constant anxiety, constant tension to truly liking who I am. Not every day. There are times where I'm like, why am I like this? And I have a little glimpse back into what it was like to sort of be that older version of myself. And I'm like, oh, that was uncomfortable. And those moments of kind of meeting myself in that way are uncomfortable still. But the tools to be able to be like, oh, I see what this is. I see what this is. I understand what my mind is doing. I understand what my body is doing. I understand what I'm seeking, right? That being able to actually put into action these tools and to marry up the mental stuff with the physical stuff and kind of figure out and explore and get curious about how they relate, how they influence each other, that was the game changer. And so I've had a few people ask me recently, why did you do the counseling on top of the yoga stuff, the movement stuff? And that's why. Because I don't think that we can ignore the fact that our body and mind really are not, we can't kind of pull one out from the other and be like, well, this is body-based, this is mind-based. They 100% overlap, interweave, influence each other. And it wasn't until I really addressed that kind of emotional self-loathing stuff that the chronic tension dissipated. Now, that's not to say that I don't ever experience tension. I absolutely do. 100%. And, there's a couple of persistent tension things that I'm still navigating, still managing. And there's still times where I'm like, oh, things hurt. It's not like, it's not like it was one day I was full of tension and the next day it was wiped clean. I will never make those claims. I will never make the claim that you can be free of something, because it hasn't been my experience, and it's not even my desire, right? It's not my desire to be this perfect human. My desire is to be able to lean closer to the whole of myself and still meet all of the pieces with compassion, kindness, and curiosity. And ultimately, that is the work that I'm doing. That is why the counseling and the movement have come together to create a more holistic set of, I don't know, what would you call that? More holistic set of something, tools, I guess, in order to recognize and respect. I think this is a big part of it, respect that body-mind connection. Because if we are pretending that they're separate, if we are pretending that we can kind of move through the body without ever addressing, you know, how we talk to ourselves, how we think, how we respond, we're doing ourselves and we're doing our body and we're doing our mind a disservice, because there is no way to kind of pull them apart and be like, well, it's all just body or it's all just mind. We can go in either doorway, absolutely. And we might spend a long time going through one doorway before we get to the other. And that's okay. You know, I spent years and years and years just going through that physical doorway of yoga and mindful sort of movement. I saw counselors and psychologists when I was younger as well, and have consistently kind of done that through the years. And it took me a really long time to find somebody that I kind of enjoyed being in relationship with in that context. So that's the other thing I want to kind of point out is, you know, the amount of people I have kind of used for support over the years are many, like truly many. I haven't done this work on my own. And I don't continue to do it on my own. I still seek support from other people. I still struggle some days. I still get glimpses of that person that I was not that long ago, who really didn't like herself and didn't really know how to move beyond that. And when I think now about the mostly, because like I said, it's not, you know, it's not perfect, and I don't aspire to that, but the mostly sense of peace that I experience being in myself, oh, it's like a sigh of relief. It's a sigh of relief. It's like, I don't mind. This is good. I like being in here. I like this person. I'm interested. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by who I am. I'm intrigued by who I might be. I'm intrigued by how my mind and body are relating. I'm intrigued by all of it. There's this sense of curiosity that was impossible before. It was impossible because the judgment, the self-judgment, the self-loathing, the self-criticism didn't leave any space for curiosity. It didn't leave any space. It kind of like took up all the room. And so to be in a place like that just feels really lovely. I don't know if you can hear that. The cat's gone bananas in the other room. But yeah, I really just, like I said, I don't know what episode number this is. I don't have any notes, which is, I usually do have some notes. But I just really thought, you know, maybe I don't share enough about my story and what led me here and my why. Part of this comes up because as a small business owner, I'm forever trying to find clearer ways of telling people what I do so that if it's for you, you know, right? Really simple kind of business 101. And I've struggled with that really a lot, actually. I've struggled with finding the succinct words to describe what I do, because it isn't simple, and yet in some ways it is profoundly simple, but I still don't have the words. And so I thought I would put a whole bunch of words to it in this episode and see what fell out. And I still don't have simple words for it. I still don't have that. In some ways, some days, I wish I could be just like, get stronger with movement. Here's the thing. Or, you know, kind of just a simple thing. But the truth of it is, I hope that with every podcast episode, with every, you know, Instagram post or reel or class inside the SelfKind Hub or one-on-one session with me, that the work that I get to do in relationship with other people, my hope is that bit by bit, it helps others to feel more at home in themselves, to be able to meet themselves and their body with more compassion, more kindness, more love. We do that through movement. We do that through, all these kind of counseling tools that can be really useful. And I don't know, what's the outcome of that? It's kind of more peace, right? It's more like a sense of home in yourself. And I don't know how to say that any other way. So here we are with lots of words around it. And I'd love to know if this is helpful. You can come and find me. I always love to hear from you. I'm at @EricaWebb_selfkind. If after listening to this, you're like, oh, okay, I get it now, and I want more of that, then make sure you're following me over on Instagram. I just told you where you can find me. If you haven't signed up to my email list, the link for that is in my show notes as well. And there's information on my website about how we can work together if that is something that you would like to do or just explore. All right, a very off the cuff kind of episode today. I hope that you took something away from it. And I will be back next week with probably a more scripted, or not even scripted, I never script, but I'll have some notes and probably will know what episode it is. But I'm looking forward to talking to you then, and have a great one wherever you are.